planes kept coming, day after day, night after night.
"15 houses were destroyed with a single bomb. In 1940, the war was at its most ferocious. Germany had conquered most of Europe. Britain was still undefeated, but Germany still had them firmly in their sights. Germany fought a hard fight. Their submarines targeted our boats carrying essential food supplies, sinking many. Britain had no alternative but to introduce rationing to ensure that food was distributed fairly.
Ration coupons were green in colour and shaped like stamps. When you went into the shop, you were only allowed to use 2 of your coupons. You couldn't use all of them. You were limited to only 2 at a time.
In the morning, you'd join the queue, but everyone was trying to get to the front. It was quite rough. You could only buy small amounts at the time. You were limited in weight for sausages and meat. Cheese was hard to find, and sugar was almost impossible to get hold of. Eggs were actually powdered. It was revolting.
I'd go shopping and pick up the things I wanted, like bread. I took the food to the counter, only to be told, no, that's too much. The cheese I had was cut right down. It was so small, but it was as much as we were allowed.
Before the war, we enjoyed eating what we liked when we liked. When rations began, food was limited according to how many there were of you. It was such a small amount of things like sugar. The food had to last for a week. There just wasn't enough food.
The British and American ships went to Russia to take food to help the Russians. The Germans would wait for them and torpedo the ships. The food would be washed ashore. Every day, the people in Peterhead would gather by the shoreline, waiting for the food to be washed up. They'd rush over with their prams, fill them with food, and quickly leave. They'd then come back for more.
During the food shortage, people depended on word of mouth to find food. Deaf people would miss out. I've been told that some deaf people got nothing.
The Germans knew that the bigger cities and towns had factories making munitions, which is why they were targeted for airstrikes. Food supplies were destroyed, and parents were frightened that it was becoming increasingly unsafe for their children. Parents had to send their children to live in the countryside, as these areas were less heavily bombed. But it was heartbreaking to let them go. Deaf children were evacuated too, but most didn't understand why or where they were going.
I came out of school and saw a coach waiting there. I thought we were maybe going to the seaside, as we'd been there before. Then, I saw my mother standing with a group of other people. I smiled at her and waved. I was very excited, because I thought we were going somewhere and my mother was coming too. I boarded the coach and waited for my mother to board too, but I could see her from outside the window. We looked at each other and I waved at her and gestured for her to come in. My mother didn't move. She stood in the same spot. She began to wave goodbye and I started to scream, "No, no." She continued to wave goodbye as the coach began moving off. I kept screaming, "No, no." And my mother half walked, half ran behind the coach, blowing me kisses. I burst into tears. The staff tried to console me, but I kept saying, "No, I want my mother." The coach drove off, leaving my mother behind.
I had a small case with me. I didn't know what it was for. We arrived at a school and I saw my head teacher standing there. They were saying, "Come in, come in." I didn't want to. I felt sick and I wanted to go home.
Life was getting tougher and tougher. The children had been evacuated, and the adults started to work to support the war effort. A lot of people don't realise that deaf people contributed too.
Deaf people worked during the war. Some of them made the planes, others worked elsewhere. My job was to make the army uniforms. I worked and worked on the machines. It was very hard work in terrible conditions. I didn't like it, so I moved to making caps for military personnel, like the police and the Navy.
Well, I wanted to join the land army. That meant you'd work on the farms. But, well, they wouldn't let me, because I'm deaf. So instead, they sent me to work at the Smithwick factory, where I'd have to make war munitions, like guns.
I worked in a factory on the lathe machines, making bits and pieces. We were told we had to make 800 pieces a day. 800.
My mother worked in a chocolate factory. When the war broke out, she wanted to help in the war effort. My grandparents, who are both deaf, said, "Oh no, you're deaf. It's better you stay in the chocolate factory." My mother said okay, but she carried on looking for work. When she found a job, she told my grandmother that she'd been called for war work. Grandmother was gutted. Her job was to make the bombs. On a bomb, there's an outer shell with the explosives inside. She had to put on the shell and then pull a lever and lock it into position. The bomb was then ready to go. That was my mother's job.
British people worked very hard to keep Britain safe and functioning. They tried to stop the Germans advancing, but they were unsuccessful. The Germans now reached the coast and were ready to face the British people. We were anything but safe.
Germany had invaded Poland and had conquered both France and Belgium. I was at school in Margate, and as Germany approached, they decided to evacuate all of the children to Reading. Back then, I thought that Germany would conquer us too. It was very worrying.
Well, he had come, he had seen. And now all he had to do was conquer.
The army set up 2 6-inch cannons on the seafront and reels of barbed wire, anything to prevent the Germans from invading.
History's greatest drama is being performed in the London Theatre of War. Anti-aircraft crews are setting the stage for a repeat performance.
My mother worked in a bomb factory. They had 3 stages of sirens during an air raid. The first was for a group who could walk at a normal pace. The second was for a group who were able to walk more quickly. And the last was for a group who could run. My mother volunteered to be in the 3rd group. There were only a few who volunteered to be in Group 3. Most volunteered to be in Group 2 and some volunteered to be in Group 1. The foreman knew my mother was deaf, so he'd alert her to the strikes. He'd signal Group 1 and Group 2, and my mother knew that when it got to Group 3, she had to hurry to get out. She also knew the explosives needed to be covered. Luckily, she moved them to safety before the foreman said 3, and then she ran as fast as she could up to the wall of the shelter. Up against the wall was the safest she could be, as she couldn't be seen from above. She ran towards it, and the people were willing her on. She ran as fast as she could to safety. When she got there, people were touching her, checking she was okay. She pushed them away, confused. They took her outside and showed her the factory wall filled with bullet holes. The plane had shot at the building, and bullets had sailed over my mother's head as she ran. She hadn't heard anything. She was so focused on getting to the shelter.
I opened the window and felt a gust of wind blow past me. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. I looked up at the sky and saw a Nazi shooter plane. I shut the window quickly. When I turned around, I saw that our piano had a bullet hole in it. And that's when I realised I must have been shot at. I was shaking.
was outside in the garden when I looked up and saw that a German parachute was coming down. I ran away as fast as I could, as I thought I'd be shot.
My father was at work when an air raid began, so he went into a shelter. He saw the plane being hit and watched it crash to the ground. Father then saw the Home Guard had found 2 German soldiers and had them stood with their hands on their heads at gunpoint. As they got nearer, my father thought, oh no, because they looked so young. They were only young boys with bright blonde hair, and they looked so frightened. They were put opposite my father in the shelter as the raid was still going on. The Home Guard held them at gunpoint. They had to keep their hands on their heads. My father felt so sorry for them. Germany had sent such young boys to fight. My father had a packet of cigarettes, and he asked if he could offer the soldiers one. He offered the first soldier. Slowly he took his hand off his helmet and took one, as did the second soldier. My father went to light the cigarettes, but he was told he couldn't as it would be seen from above. They hid the flame and lit them themselves. My father felt so sorry for them. When the airstrike was over, they were taken away. They acknowledged my father as they passed. He never knew what happened to them.
Now, it is 1944, and the war was at its height. Britain and America were planning how they could defeat Germany, and planned how they could win back control of France, which had been seized by the Nazis.
The American army came to our factory. They bought 700 pairs of boots to be repaired in 3 days. We didn't know what they were for. 2 days later, we found out they were for the D-Day landings.
I saw the soldiers marching past in their thousands. It took them nearly all day to pass. The next day, they were gone.
The D-Day landings were on the 6th of June 1944. Thousands of soldiers descended on France by boat, parachute and plane. They landed on the beaches of Normandy with the aim of defeating the Germans. But would they be successful?
The ground shook as the planes flew overhead. There were so many with black and white markings. The next day they returned, and the day after they went back again, flying low.
The D-Day landings were incredibly successful, and we were able to advance through Nazi Europe. British people heard of the many victories. Then on May the 7th, 1945, British people heard the news they had longed for. The German High Command had officially surrendered. The white flag was raised. The war was over.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May. The German war is therefore at an end. we may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day.
The headlines in every newspaper were, "Germany has surrendered. We had won the war."
The great news ran through the land. Manchester, Glasgow, Cardiff, Birmingham, London. In every town and village, big and small.
I saw Churchill giving his trademark victory sign. We all applauded him. We were so grateful for his efforts during the war.
When my father returned from the war, everybody was in the street applauding him and welcoming him home. I think, as far as I know, he was the only local man to join the army, the only one. The others had joined the local Home Guard, but my father had been to war. When he came home, he was applauded in the street. My father was a very shy man. He came home carrying his gun. Everybody watched him coming, applauding. That's how I remember it.
I was out with my friends, talking and playing games, when suddenly I saw what I thought was my brother approaching. He was carrying his bag and had a cap on. As he approached, I felt it had to be my brother. So I ran home and exclaimed to my parents and sisters, "I think Murray has come home." We all went outside and saw him in the distance. My mother couldn't run, but my two sisters ran up to him. I was only a small boy, but I was so happy to see my brother. We cried and kissed him. We hadn't seen him for over 6 years.
My father was finally back for good. The four of us were back together as a family. It was great to have him back. Every boy needs his father. It was so nice to have him back.
We were all so happy. There were parties in the street and everyone was happy. But I kept thinking of my poor 3 brothers who were killed in action. One brother was in the war in Germany. He was 23 when he was called up to the army as the Germans were advancing. He was up on a telephone pole when he was shot down. He was buried in Holland. He was really good to me. We used to chat a lot, but now he's dead. My brothers were hearing. Another brother was in the Navy and he was killed in action. My last brother was in Burma. He was a prisoner of war. He fell ill and died. Our family was completely destroyed. My poor mother. I was the only one left. We were lucky in the fact that we were able to receive a lot of information during the war compared to other deaf people. The war meant nothing to them. They didn't see the point of Remembrance Day. They weren't bothered. I told them it was important to pay our respects to those who were killed saving our country. This was important, especially for deaf people, as it wasn't only Jews who were sent to concentration camps. Deaf, blind and disabled people were sent there too to be eradicated. I've often said if it wasn't for the war effort, we would have been eradicated. And this is something most deaf people don't realise because their parents don't give them the information. I was lucky I was able to get this information, and that's why I pay my respects every Remembrance Sunday. I get up early and I go to my local war memorial and give thanks to those who gave their lives for our freedom. It is so important.
We must learn from the past and never go to war again. Deaf people were involved in the war. Their stories and their culture will always be a part of our deaf history. We must hold on to that forever and not let their stories be lost.